Hello everyone, Ivy Barrow here again with podcast number 3. Today I will be going through my thoughts on the infantilization of British royal family males. Basically, men treated like boys and referred to as boys. Women, as we know, with independent thought are usually described in various ways similar to witchcraft and sorcery, and somehow that they have power over their weak men. But this particular podcast is about the treatment of the men in the family, particularly those referred to as the spares, and focusing on a recent article and several interviews done by one of the royal commentators, which I personally found extremely offensive, very dangerous, increasing risk, to name but just a few. So let me just introduce it and then we'll go into more detail. And as usual, I have done some research, and I'll be linking my thoughts to established reports and opinions by people who know far more about it than I do. So hopefully you find it interesting. So here we go. I have noticed over many years now how some royal commentators continuously described male members of the family as if they are children. The odd occasion is not a problem of itself, but when the volume of times begins to emerge as a theme, then it starts to put markers in the sand for me. To take it one step further, most of the men in the UK royal family are not really reported on that often, not least because their day-to-day activities, such as they might be, and the fact that it is rare for something to be carried out every day anyway, is of little interest to the general populace, and therefore it is rare that royal rota personnel are encouraged, in inverted commas, to write about them. Those high in the line of succession come under faux scrutiny and describe any possible mishaps on the errors of a childish behavioural trait, or it is the fault of staff in their circle. All subsequent male siblings in the line of succession are infantilized in some way, regardless of age, but it is quite stark when they become adults, and blaringly obvious when any of them show any independent thought. It is clearly not encouraged. My concerns about a recent article and subsequent series of interviews relating to Prince Harry and Prince William led me to undertake a short piece of research into this treatment of adults. And lo and behold, I found clear links with many of the academic models and frameworks I have used in previous articles and my 2 podcasts to date. So, please join me and we can have a user-friendly meander through a small sample of academic theory around this subject. And I guarantee you will see a pattern of behaviour and the royal family's response to a perceived error in judgment as being questionable in a concerning way. Once again, the treatment of children and infantilized adults in the British monarchy should be a cause for concern. The latest article from Ingrid Seward suggesting that the only way Harry would return to the UK to live, not just to visit, would be if a tragedy was to occur to his wife Meghan. And to take it one step further, in order for there to be any chance of the rift between the brothers being healed, would be if a tragedy occurred to Kate. The rationale being that the brothers would turn to each other for support. Moving on. Apart from the obvious flaw with that conclusion, it is reprehensible that any media individual would be allowed to state this in tabloid publications. Yes, more than one is running with the story, and the rollout of TV interviews. It encourages the unstable ones out there to step forward, just like some have done in the last 4 years in respect of Meghan, to do their bit for Queen and country and remove one of the named targets. It is an utter disgrace. Clearly, some people have not gleaned any more knowledge since the death of Princess Diana, as here we are publicly almost wishing a similar fate to Meghan. Yet another reason why the establishment believes Harry would return to live in the UK and help his brother. I have no doubt that if challenged about this, Ingrid would say it was not her intention and that her words had been taken out of context. She is quoted as saying that this is her personal opinion, but regardless of her words, I am 100% certain that her latest article and media interviews would not have occurred without sanction from the top of the royal family. Let us not forget, in August, Arthur Edwards, the photographer, did his bit for Queen and country by trying for his BAFTA award with his fake apology for the Royal Rota treatment of Meghan for the last 4 years, claiming it was a mistake, etc., etc. Arthur begged for Harry to return to the UK to help the overworked and overstretched royal family, blah, 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 yawn, yawn, yawn. That emotional blackmail did not work, so I think his BAFTA win is not included in the next awards ceremony. So, the next individual from the Royal Mausoleum has been wheeled out in the form of Ingrid Seward. It is important to note that Arthur Edwards is a media ally of Prince Charles. He is always present at Prince Charles' engagements and was when Princess Diana was alive, and he was there to photograph William and Harry from birth until Harry ceased working with the Royal Rota earlier this year. Ingrid is the editor of The Majesty magazine, and it is clear, without the monarchy in the UK, there would be no need for that publication. Another sideline for Ingrid is that she writes for the Mail on Sunday. Yes, the publication that Meghan is taking to court. Another interesting fact, Ingrid is the person who was one of the commentators on CBS for Harry and Meghan's wedding, and was involved in a series of interviews for American and UK audiences, where she quite openly said that she would have preferred if Harry had married an English rose. The final point I'd like to make in this section is that Ingrid has a book out soon. In fact, it may be out already, but this book is about Prince Philip. In my mind, it is no coincidence that two royal media people, who are both linked to senior members of the royal family, have given interviews and written articles over the last 10 weeks, all trying to use emotional blackmail to persuade Harry to return to live, not just visit, in the UK. To add the clickbait element in the article, quite comfortable to add a tragedy or two to the mix, with no regard to the increased risk created, and at the end of the day, they are only women in the eyes of the aristocracy, and the emphasis being on getting Harry to return to the UK. Why anyone would believe that Prince Harry would seek solace and comfort from the family that sanctioned abuse against his wife and son is beyond naive. Once again, the British royal family cannot read the room. So, what is infantilization? Some experts have associated infantilization with narcissism. So, a little snapshot here of a description of a narcissistic parent. Someone who will have no respect for their children's boundaries, They are like pawns on a chessboard, to be played with and controlled. Control doesn't stop when children become adults. This game will go on until the child calls checkmate. Note how it is two very senior in age royal correspondents or photographers that continuously refer to William and Harry as the boys. Both of these correspondents have done recent TV appearances and written articles trying to persuade Harry to return to live in the UK and to help Prince William. Parents involved in this family, in this clique, in this group, in this protected group, however you want to describe them, official name royal family, feel the need to exude superiority in a variety of ways, including micromanaging their adult children's activities. Research shows that once these children reach adulthood, children be any children involved as victims in this, not just those referred to as spares in the royal family, once they reach adulthood, they may lack basic skills necessary to function. Parents tend to disapprove of any decision made without their input or approval. Essentially, they aim to train their children to seek approval from the parents regarding every decision. For example, the way the royal family have tried and continue to believe that they can control Harry and how he moves forward in life, regardless of him permanently settling on another continent. Another example is a 12-month review, where they believe that they can have input into the details of the Netflix deal, tried to keep Harry in debt to the royal family with the framework around Frogmore and the 12-year deal, took away his security, left the Sussexes exposed to disgusting media coverage, etc., etc. Adults in those situations have been indoctrinated, programmed to doubt themselves, their intentions and own thoughts on people and situations. Fortunately for Harry, he had spent 10 years in the armed forces, so had the opportunity to be with real people. The fact that he preferred to be on the front line, and he was unlike other royals who played at being in the armed forces for a very short period, than be with his family, spoke volumes. Harry was able to see another side of life that he would otherwise have not experienced. For several years before he met Meghan, Harry was always vocal about not wanting to be part of royal life. Once he met Meghan, he realised he could do far more for and with his self-created projects outside of the confines of royal life. His involvement with all of his projects was real, not cosmetic for photo opportunities. Narcissistic parents believe that they have the right to interfere in the private lives of their adult children. They use excessive criticism. Hurtful comments are used to undermine their son or daughter self-esteem and self-confidence, often under the guise of helping them. The goal is to keep adult children from leading independent lives. Can you start to see a similarity with members of the royal family who have tried in the past to leave, who have tried or considered a life outside of palace walls, and Harry, who is the first one to have actually succeeded, and the treatment that is constantly tried, different approaches, different ideas of how to get him to return, not believing in the first place he would succeed in leaving at all. Infantilization can manifest itself as verbal abuse, denial of emotional support. If it continues long enough, it can lead to the adult children cutting off contact with parents completely. The impact and the symptoms of this approach by parents can be the following. It can have a dehumanising effect. It undermines their individuality. It marginalises their abilities, thoughts, feelings and actions. Over time, can lead to depression or anxiety. Adult children often need to seek professional help from a licensed therapist or a counsellor. People who choose to go the no contact route with parents have usually determined that trying to preserve the relationship is unhealthier than making a clean break. Again, we can all, I am sure, think of instances that apply to both Meghan and Harry, and the attempts by parents or senior adults within the royal family, in the one case, and how they try to have control over their lives and have input into things that they decide to do for themselves. Ingrid Seward, in her latest article, expressed how can I put it? She said that children in royalty are not elected officials, but they are in fact born into duty. Really? Is that supposed to be a good thing? In my opinion, every act that the key players who have involved themselves in the emotional abuse of the Sussexes have carried out actions with the direct or implied permission of the British royal family, and confirms my strong belief that this is against several aspects of the legislation on human rights. Duty is a disguise for modern-day slavery. Children who have no rights. Children who are not allowed independent thought. Children created to serve the firstborn, and no deviation from that destiny is allowed. Children grow into adults with many of the basic life skills missing from their emotional intelligence. And if any wish to have a life outside of the monarchy, it is stamped upon by a variety of methods, because ultimately the monarchy has to survive, and every tradition and duty quoted is there to ensure the continuance of the British royal family and the establishment, which includes government officials, newspaper barons and their designated team of reporters, otherwise known as the Royal Rota, assisted by television and magazine personnel, ably supported by their professional regulators. A whole industry built up to ensure the lifespan of the British royal family, with all the employment those areas have as part of their infrastructure. That is what anyone who wishes to work with the independent thought is faced with. And when all requests are refused to allow independence, while still being willing to work with the royal family, then the alternative is to leave. As we have seen, it has been made very difficult for Harry and Meghan to leave. The abuse that began in 2016 was ramped up several notches in January 2020 against the Sussexes when they announced that they were stepping back and they would not be working with the Royal Rota in their life outside of the UK and outside of the royal family. The emotional abuse has been like knives in the back for both Harry and Meghan. Daggers coming from many directions, all with the aim to break them into submission. The abuse has been shocking to watch, and I am personally relieved that a global audience is becoming more and more aware of the games being played here, and it is to the shame of the UK. Until recently, all this abusive behaviour and illegal activity has been knowledge to the UK only. Royal Reporter's remit was to ensure that a biased type of news was fed to the UK public and was carefully crafted to create hatred towards Meghan, life-threatening hatred towards Meghan, and ultimately Harry became a target too, because he would not leave his wife and son for the royal family. Slowly but surely, people are beginning to realise all is not as shown in the UK tabloids, and I firmly believe the House of Cards, otherwise known as the Monarchy and Friends, will come falling down one day. Every time Harry and Meghan make any kind of appearance in the media, all the key groups, all the abusers mentioned earlier in this podcast, basically, if you recall the 7 stages of grief model that I used in podcast number 1, all these key people basically are running up and down that grid, generally occupying shock, denial, anger and bargaining sections. Arthur Edwards and Ingrid Seward, no doubt with the lead coming up from high levels in the UK monarchy, have been and still are operating in the bargaining stage. The whole group, from the British royal family to its mouthpieces in various sections of the media, just cannot seem to read the room. It will be one of the major plinths of their downfall. Anger, jealousy and competitiveness rise to the top of the emotional outbursts from the groups mentioned on every single time Harry and Meghan make the news. Global news, not just the biased, negative, sarcastic reporting of UK press. Every time Harry and Meghan film anything from their home, the value of the property is always mentioned in articles, along with the cost of contents on view in the background of any footage. Totally unnecessary and never done with any other member of the royal family, working or non-working, when an article is published about them by the usual royal correspondence, including the Royal Rota. This so-called professional group of journalists move between apathy and anger on that model. The lack of access to the Sussexes by the UK tabloid press, along with the palace sources no longer having any news to spill, only fictional stories are now created with a deliberate aim of getting a reaction from Harry and Meghan. As a parent myself, I would never wish to return to the UK and bring my child to stay at Frogmore Cottage with a nanny whilst attending to patronages. I can understand now that the Sussexes have paid for Frogmore Cottage, not even going to go there about payment for a rented place that already had public funds submitted for the payment for renovations. I just hope that at some point in the future that Harry and Meghan buy another property, somewhere that they can stay and be secure enough for the family to stay there whilst they need to attend to their projects, rather than Frogmore Cottage. I would love to see them walk away from that in due course. As mentioned in my last podcast, one Queen's Counsel, otherwise known as a senior barrister, referred to the undertones of racism in Royal Rota reporting of Meghan, and the implications for other people of colour in the UK without resources at their disposal to challenge such rhetoric and treatment. One of the royal reporters was happy to admit in print that there were indeed undertones of racism in their articles, but that undertones are not against the law. That says it all. Add to that Arthur Edwards also putting in print in October 2020 that the Sussexes deserve all the abuse they are receiving because they continue to refuse access to the Royal Rota. Now we have Ingrid encouraging a tragedy before Duchess of Sussex, to encourage Harry to return to the UK, and possibly Duchess of Cambridge to meet the same fate, to encourage William to seek solace from Harry. Again, words fail me. The continued breach of so many elements of human rights legislation, in my non-legal opinion, both local and international, and the incitement of violence towards the Duchess of Sussex by someone who writes for the Mail on Sunday, the paper that is currently involved in litigation with the Duchess of Sussex, is shameful to see and beyond evil. Anyone else outside that protected circle, writing and giving interviews after interviews and standing by their assertion, is ensuring the UK's journey to the trash is well underway. Media now encourages hate crime, and happy to encourage increased risk to named individuals, even though the same media lost a court case where they were named in January 2019. The paparazzi organisation who compromised safety of the home of Harry and Meghan were given details, including the postcode of the property in question, by one of the Royal Rota. The UK Royal Reporter was named, and is known to most people anyway, as the story ran for several days, and the Rota were more than pleased with themselves until legal action was taken. And the Duke of Sussex, who took out the action, was successful. There was no apology ever printed, or if there was one, it was never promoted as it should have been. There is a dark side to UK monarchy that few wish to talk about. This article and podcast is just touching on one aspect, which I maintain is a breach of multiple articles of human rights legislation. It is overdue for an international legal expert to look at this issue. There should never be a repeat of what happened to Princess Diana in her life as a royal family member, and the unnecessary death of an independent thinking female in the UK royal family. There must be no repeat. Children created to be modern slaves in an opulent setting, but treated like prey and hunted down if they ever questioned the duty that they had no say in, and if they ever wished to leave and create a life for themselves and their family as per their basic human right. The dark cloud of treating adults like children has potential for many permutations in the monarchy. Too many, in inverted commas, famous people proven guilty years down the line for child abuse crimes, who previously have been given awards and titles by the Queen. Too many to ignore, in my opinion. Only the Queen is above the law. I have issues with that too, but that is another subject entirely. But someone needs to speak for the indoctrinated children, officially referred to as the spares in royal circles, and to any adults who wish to exercise their human right to live where they please. Like all adults, they are not boys and girls outside of the royal family, and they are free to choose to do so and become self-financing, and to be able to walk away from royal life without being pursued like prey across continents and made to feel like a traitor to the UK. Just like the previous podcast, there is an accompanying article that goes with this podcast, and the article has once again a few more diagrams for you all to look at and to go through in more detail. I have given something like 6 or 7 references at the end of the article, which you may wish to look into and research yourselves, and it'll lead you to other areas, but those are the main 6 that I used, and it gives you more detailed reports about this term of infantilization of adults, treating adults like children. And in terms of the monarchy, they've taken it one step further because they've built it into their framework of how they govern themselves and how they keep the monarchy going by this supply of children that are brought along simply to be the foot soldiers of the ones above. I am not saying that they are not loved. I cannot say that. I don't live there. But what I am saying is those children are born without any rights, but are labelled as spares. They are brought into the world deliberately to support the ones above, to make sure there is infrastructure. They don't have, the majority of them, any life experiences outside of that bubble, so they lack the basic skills, as I've said earlier in the podcast. So even if they wanted to leave, I would suspect the majority would never do it. They wouldn't survive. They don't know how to look after themselves. They certainly have no skills in the workplace other than working for friends who will put up with whatever basic skills they have. They're not prepared for the outside world. They only know that environment. And those who are non-working are basically just in the background. But those non-working royals still cost the UK taxpayer. If we're going to have a monarchy, I really do not see why it has to be anywhere near the size of what we have at the moment. But to be honest, I question the need for a monarchy, full stop. So things that are the references at the end of the article is about the actual topic of children or adults being treated like children, but it may lead you to read on a wider subject areas, in terms of children born into opulence. Therefore, people would be thinking, what's the point? I don't need to worry about them. I've got far more important things to worry about in my day-to-day life. And that is true. But equally, those children didn't ask to be born. They're born into that environment, and if they wish to leave it and work for themselves and do normal things, yes, with money, I accept all of that. But as I said, they were born into it. They didn't ask to be born like any other child. They've come into the world and they're told immediately this is their role. They're not allowed to shine brighter than the one above them. They're not allowed to have independence, or at least not to voice it. And they are made to feel less than from a very young age. And they grow up with that mindset. That, and it's in its simplest form, is serious child abuse. The psychological damage that's being done from a very early age is just wrong. And as I said, for those that want to stay, if they sort of finance themselves, whatever, that's fine. But for those who wish to leave and those who stay at taxpayer expense, it needs to be looked at. But in this case, I'm focusing on the treatment over 4 years of Harry and Meghan, and for all of Harry's life, being told he is the spare, he's there to support William, and all of this that's gone on since they've wanted to have a life of their own, of their choosing, and earn money, all of what's been done and is continually being done to them, and the way it's been reported in the press to encourage hatred and negativity around the couple, is simply because they want to leave. It's not a crime to want to leave your parents, to want to leave and not be governed by your grandmother. It's not a crime to want to work. It's not a crime to vote. We won't go into that. We did that in the last podcast, but you'll see where I'm coming from. I just feel it's totally unwarranted. It is against the law, probably more than one law, but in this case I'm talking about human rights. And the article that Ingrid wrote last Thursday, from when I'm recording this podcast the previous Thursday, I felt very strongly about. It was not necessary, it was uncalled for, it was wrong on every level, and it's encouraging hate crime and putting people's life at an increased risk of a risk that's already been placed there by the same Royal Rota because of the way they report and the words that they use. And here we are, less than a week ago, another article, several interviews, talking about if something happened tragically to Meghan, who was mentioned first, Harry would return to the UK. That, on its own, I am just so shocked about. Hence the reason for this podcast. So sorry if it rambles a little. It's come from a passionate place. I feel very strongly about encouraging and inciting hate activity, hate crimes, full stop, and putting even an additional risk on a heavy list of incidents already around Sussexes. It is totally wrong. And furthermore, they're not even part of the working rules anymore. There's absolutely no reason for it other than the income fall, the massive drop in income for the royal family, and their popularity is falling with it almost as fast because Harry and Meghan are not there anymore. And whether people like that or not, that's fact. And in any way, if they can get Harry back, they feel all will be fine. My feeling is Harry does not represent the whole royal family. He's not the slave of the royal family. And after the way they treated his wife, they're very lucky he even says hello to any of them when he does visit. So, yeah, it's my sort of personal view. So when the haters come, as no doubt they will, fine. It's my personal opinion, just like how Ingrid's quoting hers. But the difference is I'm not inciting hatred. I'm just pointing out facts and the law and the breaches within it as I see it. So, hope you enjoy the article. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And I'll be speaking to you soon. Bye.